There's a hidden pattern in history, a pattern that has toppled three of the most powerful governments in the last 250 years. And right now, in 2025, the United States is following that same pattern, grievance by grievance, stage by stage. It's almost like history is reading from a script written in blood, chaos, and fire. In 1789, France was unstoppable, wealthy, cultured, advanced beyond its time. Yet within 5 years, the government collapsed. The king, beheaded, the country, thrown into the terror where 40,000 people were executed for political crimes. Fast forward to 1917, Russia, a massive empire ruling 180 million people. Its military had just survived World War I, yet in 8 months, the regime crumbled. The Tsar, executed. The Bolsheviks took control, and over the next years, 20 million would die in civil war and purges. Then, 1959, Cuba, a prosperous Caribbean nation, tourists, casinos, a functioning economy, and in 2 short years, Fidel Castro overthrew the government, nationalized everything, and transformed Cuba into a communist dictatorship that lasted 60 years. 3 revolutions, 3 collapses, 3 moments when stability turned into chaos. And every single time, the people in power, they never saw it coming. They thought they were untouchable. They thought the peasants would never rise. They thought the system was too strong to fall. They were wrong every single time. And now, every single warning sign from France, Russia, and Cuba is flashing red in the United States. Wealth inequality, corruption, loss of faith in institutions, rage simmering beneath the surface. We're not heading toward the storm. We are in stage 4. History tells us stage 5 and 6 hit fast. But before we go deeper, you need to understand what a revolution really is. Not a protest, not a riot, not political change. A revolution is when the existing order is completely destroyed and replaced by something new, often something far worse. Revolutions don't happen because people are poor. Poverty has existed for all of human history. Revolutions happen when expectations exceed reality, when people believe they deserve better, when the gap between elites and everyone else tears the social contract apart. Most importantly, revolutions happen when people lose faith in the system itself, when the government, the courts, elections, anything at all can't fix their grievances. And once peaceful reform becomes impossible, violent revolution becomes inevitable. That's not radical theory. That's John F. Kennedy's exact words. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. History proves it. France, Russia, Cuba, 3 centuries, 3 ideologies, but the exact same 6-stage collapse. Let's start at the beginning. The mother of all modern revolutions, France, 1789. In the 1780s, France was the center of European civilization, Paris, the cultural capital of the world. French was the language of diplomacy, arts, philosophy, science, all thriving. King Louis XVI sat on the throne. The monarchy had ruled for 800 years. It seemed eternal, unshakable, untouchable. But beneath the glitter of Versailles, the rot was total. This was stage 1 of every revolution, extreme wealth inequality. In 1789, France had 27 million people divided into 3 estates. First estate, the clergy, owned 10% of the land and paid no taxes. Second estate, the nobility, about 400,000 people, owned 25% of the land and paid almost nothing. Third estate, everyone else, 26 million peasants, workers, and middle-class citizens, owned 65% of the land and paid all the taxes. Think about that. 1.5% of the population carried no burden, while 98.5% carried everything. And it wasn't just taxes. The nobility had privileges that were outrageous. They could hunt on peasant land, demand labor, live in palaces, while peasants starved. By 1788, a bad harvest sent bread prices soaring. Bread made up 88% of a peasant's budget. When prices doubled, people couldn't eat. Meanwhile, the nobility, still feasting on 5-course meals, still throwing lavish parties at Versailles. The gap wasn't just economic, it was a complete disconnect from reality. This is stage 2, government corruption and incompetence. King Louis XVI, not evil, just weak and indecisive. France was bankrupt from wars, including helping America in its Revolutionary War. The government owed billions. Louis's solution, borrow more, raise taxes on the peasants, cut nothing. The nobility refused to pay, the clergy refused. And when Louis tried reforms, they blocked him. Why? Because the powerful would rather see the country burn than give up their privileges. Sound familiar? By 1789, France was on the edge. The government couldn't pay its debts, people couldn't afford food. So Louis called the Estates General, a representative assembly that hadn't met in 175 years. He thought it would legitimize new taxes. Instead, it became the spark. This is stage 3, middle class destroyed and radicalized. The Third Estate, peasants but also lawyers, merchants, and the educated middle class, demanded equal representation. 1 vote per person, not 1 vote per estate, which gave the nobility and clergy a 2-to-1 advantage. Louis refused. So on June 17, 1789, the Third Estate declared itself the National Assembly. They locked themselves in a tennis court and vowed not to leave until France had a constitution. This is the moment when the educated middle class turns against the system. When lawyers and merchants call the government illegitimate, revolution becomes inevitable. On July 14, 1789, Parisians stormed the Bastille, a symbol of royal authority. They killed the guards, paraded heads on pikes through the streets. The revolution had begun and it escalated fast. This is stage 4, loss of faith in institutions. The monarchy, the church, the courts all lost legitimacy. The National Assembly abolished feudalism, seized church lands, and declared the rights of man. But it wasn't enough. The radicals kept pushing. Stage 5, the revolutionary movement gains mass support. The Jacobins, led by Robespierre, demanded extreme measures, execute the king, redistribute wealth, purge enemies of the revolution. They gained popular support because the moderates had failed to deliver, the economy was still a disaster, food was still scarce, and people wanted blood. January 21st, 1793, King Louis XVI was beheaded by guillotine in public. His wife, Marie Antoinette, followed in October, and then the terror began. This is stage 6, government overthrown. Chaos reigns. From 1793 to 1794, the Committee of Public Safety, led by Robespierre, executed 40,000 people, nobles, priests, political opponents, even fellow revolutionaries who weren't radical enough. They called it purifying the revolution. It was mass murder. The guillotine ran daily in Paris. Public executions became entertainment, and the purge kept expanding, first the nobility, then moderate revolutionaries, then anyone accused of counter-revolutionary thoughts. No trial, no evidence, just accusation and death. Even Robespierre himself was eventually executed by the same system he created, because revolutions always devour their own children. By 1799, France was exhausted. 10 years of chaos, economic collapse, war on all fronts. And then Napoleon seized power in a coup, became emperor, and the revolution that began with liberty, equality, fraternity, ended in a military dictatorship that plunged Europe into 15 years of war. Lesson of France: extreme inequality plus government incompetence plus loss of faith in institutions equals revolution. And revolution almost always leads to chaos, terror, and often a dictatorship, worse than before. Fast forward 128 years, Russia, 1917. By 1917, Russia was a backward empire, ruled by Tsar Nicholas II. The Romanov dynasty had held power for 300 years. The empire spanned 180 million people, from Europe to the Pacific. But beneath the imperial facade, the rot was the same. Stage 1, extreme wealth inequality. The Tsar and nobility owned everything. Peasants, 80% of the population, owned nothing. They had been freed from serfdom in 1861, but most still worked land owned by nobles, paying rent they couldn't afford. In the cities, factory workers labored 12 to 14 hours a day for starvation wages. Child labor, common. Safety regulations, non-existent. Meanwhile, the Tsar lived in palaces. Nobles hosted balls worth more than a peasant would earn in a lifetime. The gap wasn't just economic, it was feudal, medieval, and completely unsustainable. Stage 2, government corruption and incompetence. Tsar Nicholas II was a disaster. Weak, indecisive, and out of touch with reality. He believed in divine right, that God chose him to rule and no reform was necessary. When workers peacefully marched to the Winter Palace in 1905 to demand better conditions, guards opened fire, hundreds were killed, Bloody Sunday destroyed any faith that the Tsar cared about his people. Then came World War I, Russia entered in 1914, and it was a catastrophe. Millions of poorly equipped soldiers sent to die. Officers were incompetent, supply lines collapsed, soldiers fought without bullets, entire divisions surrendered because they had nothing to fight with. By 1917, Russia had suffered 3 million casualties. The army was deserting, the economy collapsing, and the Tsar, still living in luxury, still taking advice from Rasputin, a mystical holy man with outrageous influence. February 1917, bread riots in Petrograd, St. Petersburg. Women in bread lines protested, workers joined. The army was called in, but the soldiers refused to fire on the crowds. They mutinied. This is stage 3, middle class and military turn against the government. When the army won't defend you, the government is over. The Duma, Russia's parliament, demanded Nicholas abdicate. On March 15, 1917, he did. After 300 years, the Romanov dynasty ended, not with a war, but with a whimper. A provisional government took over, led by Alexander Kerensky. They promised reforms, elections, a constitution, but they made a fatal mistake. They kept Russia in World War I. The soldiers wanted peace. The people wanted food. The provisional government delivered neither. This is stage 4, loss of faith in institutions. Within months, the government lost legitimacy. Seen as weak, incompetent, beholden to foreign powers, into that vacuum stepped Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks. Stage 5, revolutionary movement gains mass support. Lenin promised 3 things: peace, land, bread, end the war, redistribute land to peasants, feed the people. Simple, direct, powerful. The Bolsheviks built a disciplined revolutionary organization ready to seize power. October 25th, 1917, the Bolsheviks launched a coup. They stormed the Winter Palace, arrested the provisional government, and Lenin declared Soviet power. Less than 24 hours, almost bloodless, but what followed was anything but peaceful. Stage 6, government overthrown. Chaos follows. The Russian Civil War, 1918 to 1922. Reds versus whites, monarchists, liberals, foreign intervention, total war. The Bolsheviks won through ruthless terror. The Cheka, secret police, executed anyone suspected of counter-revolutionary activity. Entire villages wiped out. July 1918, the Tsar and his entire family were executed in a basement, shot, bayoneted, even the children. By 1922, the Bolsheviks controlled Russia. The cost? 10 million dead in the Civil War, famine killed millions more, the economy destroyed. Lenin's promises? Peace equals humiliating surrender to Germany. Land equals collectivization and famine. Bread equals rationing and starvation. The revolution that promised liberation delivered dictatorship. Stalin would take over in 1924 and kill 20 million more in purges and famines. Lesson of Russia: government incompetence plus military defeat plus organized revolution equals collapse in months. And what replaces it is often far worse. Now, Cuba, 1959. This is different. Cuba wasn't backward, it was relatively prosperous. One of the highest standards of living in Latin America. Havana was called the Monte Carlo of the Caribbean, tourism, casinos, American investment. But beneath the glamour, the pattern repeats. Stage 1, extreme wealth inequality. Wealth concentrated in Havana and among elites connected to President Fulgencio Batista. Rural poor, especially in eastern Cuba, lived in poverty. Sugar plantations dominated. American companies owned most land. Profits flowed out of the country or into a tiny elite's pockets. Rural Cubans had no health care, no education, no opportunity. The gap between Havana's nightclubs and the countryside? Enormous. Stage 2, government corruption and incompetence. Batista was a dictator, seizing power in 1952. He canceled elections, ruled by decree. Corruption, total. Police could be bought, courts were rigged, opponents were imprisoned or killed. American mobsters ran casinos with Batista's blessing, paying him a cut. The government existed to enrich Batista and cronies, nothing else. Protests, violence, secret police, torture, disappearances, rage exploded, especially among young, educated Cubans. Stage 3, middle class radicalized. Fidel Castro, a lawyer from a relatively wealthy family, educated, could have joined the elite, but he saw corruption and chose revolution. 1953, Castro led an attack on the Moncada barracks. It failed. He was imprisoned. But at his trial, he gave a speech that would inspire thousands. History will absolve me. 1955, released in amnesty, went to Mexico to plan. December 1956, Castro returned with 82 men on a boat called Grandma. Stage 4, loss of faith in institutions. France, the Estates General became a revolutionary assembly. Russia, soldiers refused to defend the Tsar. Cuba, everyone knew Batista rigged the elections. When institutions lose legitimacy, when people believe the system cannot be fixed from within, they look outside the system. This is the point of no return. Stage 5, revolutionary movement gains mass support. This is when organized groups offer an alternative. France, the Jacobins; Russia, the Bolsheviks; Cuba, Castro's 26th of July movement. They promise justice, they promise to punish the corrupt, they promise a better future. People support them, not because they love the revolutionaries, but because they hate the government more. Stage 6, government overthrown, chaos follows. This is the culmination. The old order collapses. France, king beheaded, terror reigns. Russia, Tsar executed, civil war kills millions. Cuba, Batista flees, Castro becomes dictator. Here's the pattern within the pattern. The revolution never delivers what it promises. It delivers blood, purges, and new tyranny. Why? Because revolutions are led by extremists. Extremists don't build, they destroy. The moderates who wanted reform, executed or exiled. The people who thought revolution would bring freedom, learned too late. Chaos is worse than corruption. Now, the United States, 2025. Stage 1, extreme wealth inequality. 1980, top 1% controlled 8% of wealth. Today, 32% higher than France in 1789. Top 0.1%, approximately 130,000 households, own more than the bottom 90%, approximately 117 million households. The gap is larger than any time in US history, larger than the Gilded Age, larger than the 1920s. The rich are visible. Private jets, mega yachts, space tourism. Meanwhile, the middle class can't afford homes, healthcare, or education. Millions work multiple jobs just to survive. The rage is building, and it's justified. Stage 2, government corruption and incompetence. Trust in Congress, 15%. Trust in Supreme Court, collapsing. Half the country believes elections are rigged. Insider trading by members of Congress is rampant. Lobbyists write legislation. Corporations own politicians. Infrastructure crumbling. Debt, $36 trillion and climbing. Problems that should be solved aren't, because the government serves donors, not the people. When both parties are seen as corrupt and incompetent, when voters believe the system is rigged, faith in democracy dies. Stage 3, middle class destroyed and radicalized. The American middle class is being hollowed out, college is unaffordable, housing is unaffordable, healthcare costs bankrupt families, wage growth is stagnant, asset prices explode. Young people, educated young people, can't achieve what their parents had. Drowning in student debt, can't buy homes, can't start families. They're angry when lawyers, teachers, engineers, the people who should be thriving, are failing. They radicalize. They look for someone to blame, and they find targets, the elites, the billionaires, the system. This is how revolutions start. Not with the poorest, with the educated, the ones who expected better. Stage 4, loss of faith in institutions. We're here right now. Trust in media at all-time lows, trust in police, collapsed, trust in elections, broken. Half the country believes the 2020 election was stolen. The other half believes the January 6th riot was a coup attempt. Neither side trusts the other. Neither side believes the institutions are legitimate. The courts, seen as political. The FBI, seen as political. Everything, through a partisan lens. When people stop believing in shared institutions, the country is no longer united. It's two nations occupying the same territory, waiting for a spark. France had the Estates General. Russia had Bloody Sunday. Cuba had Batista's brutality. America, it could be anything: a contested election, an economic crash, a political assassination, a viral police incident. The kindling is dry, we're just waiting for the match. Stage 5, revolutionary movement gains mass support. It hasn't happened fully yet, but the pieces are forming. Left, growing support for socialist policies, wealth redistribution, eat the rich rhetoric. Right, growing support for authoritarian leaders, extra legal measures. Both sides increasingly believe the system is broken beyond repair. It needs to be torn down and rebuilt. When the moderates lose control, when the extremes gain mass support, Stage 5 is here, and we are closer than most people realize. Stage 6, chaos. No one wants to think about this. France, 40,000 executed in the terror. Russia, 10 million dead in civil war. Cuba, dictatorship for 60 years. American exceptionalism says it can't happen here. Too stable, too wealthy, too democratic. That's what they said in France. Russia was an empire lasting 300 years. Cuba was prosperous and modern. All three collapsed. The pattern doesn't care about exceptionalism. What would stage 6 look like in America? No one knows exactly. But history gives clues. Political violence escalates, not riots, organized violence. Assassinations, insurgency, military and police fracture. Some units side with government, others with revolutionaries. Supply chains break down. Food shortages, fuel shortages, economy collapses. No one trusts anything. States try to secede or refuse to recognize federal authority. Foreign powers interfere. China, Russia, they'd love to see America burn. Chaos could last years. Millions could die. And what emerges on the other side? Not the America we know. Possibly authoritarian, possibly fractured into regions, possibly something far worse. The pattern is clear. 3 revolutions, 3 identical sequences, France, Russia, Cuba. Each time the elites never saw it coming. Each time they thought they were safe. Each time they thought the peasants would never rise. And each time, extreme wealth gaps, government corruption, loss of faith in institutions, it combined into an explosion that destroyed the existing order. Where are we now? Stage 4? Wealth gap worse than France, 1789. Government dysfunction as bad as Russia, 1917. Faith in institutions as broken as Cuba, 1958. Stage 5 and 6. The pattern says they're coming. Maybe we can stop it. Maybe reform is possible. Maybe the system can fix itself. But history says otherwise. The warning signs are everywhere. 3 times it happened. Each time they thought they were different. Each time the pattern won. If this opened your eyes to where we actually are in the cycle, subscribe. Because when stage 5 begins, when revolutionary movements gain mass support, you'll want to understand what's happening and why. The answers aren't in the future, they're written in the past.